Before the story begins, hit that subscribe button, because this channel isn't just about learning English, it's about transforming your life, one word at a time. I still remember the sound of my own silence. Every time someone spoke English around me, I froze, like a statue pretending to understand, nodding at words that slipped past my mind like water through my fingers. My heart would race, my palms would sweat, and my voice, it hid somewhere deep inside me. I wasn't born shy. I wasn't afraid of people. But English, that one language, turned me into a stranger inside my own skin. At school, I'd sit at the back of the class, pretending to take notes while secretly praying the teacher wouldn't ask me to read aloud. Because when I did, my tongue would twist. My voice would tremble. My classmates would exchange tiny laughs, not cruel, but sharp enough to cut. And every giggle told me the same thing: you can't do this. For years, I believed them. I believed that some people are born confident, and I wasn't one of them. That English was for others, the ones with expensive schools, foreign accents, and fearless tongues. But deep down, something inside me refused to die. A tiny spark whispered, "There's more to you than fear." That whisper began on an ordinary morning, one that didn't look special at all. I was walking to work, my headphones playing soft motivational music. The city noise surrounded me, car horns, vendors shouting, footsteps crossing the street. Yet amid that chaos, one line from a podcast changed everything. The difference between who you are and who you want to be is what you do with your fear. I stopped walking. The world seemed to pause with me. For the first time, I didn't argue with the voice in my head. I didn't say, "But I'm not good enough." Instead, I said, "What if I try?" That what if was small, but it was enough to start a war inside me. That evening, I made a decision that felt both ridiculous and brave. I would speak English to myself. Out loud. Alone in my room. Every single day. No teachers. No audience. No fear of judgment. Just me, my mirror, and the voice I had buried for years. At first, it was awkward. I stood there, looking at my reflection, and whispered, "Hello, my name is." Then stopped. I forgot my name. That's what fear does. It makes you forget even what you already know. But I kept going. The next day, I spoke 2 lines. The next, 5. By the end of the week, I was having full conversations with my reflection, weird ones, funny ones, even emotional ones. Something started to change. It wasn't that my English became perfect overnight. It was my relationship with fear that shifted. Each word I spoke in private felt like reclaiming a piece of myself. Soon, I began carrying a small notebook. I wrote down every new English word I heard during the day, on the bus, at work, from a YouTube video, or a conversation nearby. I didn't just translate them, I felt them. When someone said, "I'm proud of you," I'd repeat it silently, thinking about what pride feels like. When I heard "don't give up," I imagined a version of me standing tall, refusing to walk away. I wasn't just learning vocabulary. I was learning courage in another language. Days turned into weeks. Weeks turned into months. Then one day, it happened. My boss announced a new project, a presentation for an international client. I wasn't supposed to speak. My job was to handle data, not people. But halfway through the meeting, the main presenter's mic stopped working. There was silence. All eyes turned to me, the only other person who had the slides. My heart pounded like a drum. My throat went dry. That old fear, the one I thought I'd buried, came rushing back, whispering, "Don't do it." And then I heard another voice. My own. The one that used to practice in the mirror. It said softly, "Do it afraid." So I stood up. My voice trembled on the first line, but it was mine. My words stumbled, but they were real. I kept going, sentence after sentence, until something incredible happened. People started nodding. Listening. Smiling. For the first time, I wasn't translating thoughts from my native language. I was thinking and feeling directly in English. That day, something inside me broke open. The fear that had caged me for years didn't vanish, it transformed. It became fuel. After the meeting, my boss patted my shoulder and said, "You did great. You spoke from the heart." And I realized fluency isn't perfection. It's connection. That night, when I looked in the mirror again, I didn't just see a learner. I saw a fighter. The person who used to whisper, "I can't," had become the one who says, "Watch me." That was the day I understood, courage isn't the absence of fear. It's speaking even when your voice shakes. From that day forward, I promised myself something. No matter how afraid I felt, I'd never let fear choose my silence again. Because fluency in language, in life, begins the moment you decide to speak. After that presentation, something changed in me quietly, but completely. The fear that once ruled me didn't vanish overnight, but it lost its power to control me. Every time I spoke a sentence in English, I felt like I was breaking another invisible chain wrapped around my mind. But courage, I learned, isn't a single moment. It's a daily choice. The next few weeks tested that lesson. People began to notice my effort. Some encouraged me. "Your English is getting better, man." Others laughed, not cruelly, but with the kind of amusement that makes you question your progress. I could have stopped there, gone back into silence. But I remembered something my heart whispered during my mirror sessions. If you quit now, you'll go back to the version of yourself who used to hide. And I couldn't go back. So, I doubled down. Every morning before work, I played English podcasts, not for grammar, but for rhythm. I listened to how native speakers paused, how they emphasized emotion, how words weren't just spoken, they were felt. I mimicked them, not to copy, but to connect. Because English wasn't just a subject anymore. It was a voice I was learning to call my own. One night, I recorded myself speaking. The first few tries were awful. My accent was heavy, my pronunciation off. I cringed listening to my playback. But then, I remembered the moment I stood up in that meeting. If I could speak in front of people while terrified, I could surely survive hearing my own mistakes. So I kept recording. Every day, for 30 days straight. I didn't focus on perfection. I focused on progress. Slowly, something magical began to happen. My sentences flowed smoother. My pauses became natural. I stopped worrying about how I sounded, and started caring about what I meant. That's when I understood something powerful. You don't learn English by memorizing words, you learn it by giving your thoughts permission to breathe. One weekend, I decided to push myself further. There was a local Speak English club that met every Saturday at a coffee shop. I'd seen their posters before, groups of strangers sitting together, talking in English. Every time I passed by, I'd think, maybe next week. But that week, I told myself, it's time. I almost didn't go. Halfway there, I thought of turning back. My mind filled with excuses. What if they laugh? What if I freeze? What if they think I'm foolish? But courage whispered again, you've faced fear before. Do it afraid again. I walked in. There were 6 people already there, chatting, laughing, sipping coffee. A young woman looked up and smiled. "Hey! First time?" I nodded, smiling nervously. "Why yes, first time." She handed me a notebook. "We just talk about anything. No grammar police here." That one line, "no grammar police here," melted half my anxiety. We started talking about movies. Then travel. Then life. At first, my voice trembled. But the more I spoke, the more alive I felt. I forgot about being right. I focused on being real. Half an hour later, I was laughing. Telling stories. I even corrected someone gently when they made a small mistake, something I'd never thought I could do. And for the first time in my life, I realized. I wasn't pretending to be confident. I was becoming it. When the session ended, one of the members said, "Your story was inspiring. You should come every week." That single sentence felt like a reward for every sleepless night I'd spent doubting myself. I walked out of that cafe smiling, my heart lighter than ever. From that day, learning English stopped being a burden. It became an adventure. I began exploring words like travelers explore new cities. Every word had a mood, a color, a history. Courage wasn't just a word, it was the bridge between fear and freedom. Confidence wasn't arrogance, it was self-respect dressed in calmness. Fluency wasn't speed, it was clarity wrapped in courage. The more I spoke, the more I discovered that English wasn't something I had to master, it was something I had to live. I started journaling in English. Each morning, I'd write one line about how I felt even if it was simple. Today, I am scared. Today, I feel proud. Today, I will try again. Those small sentences became my therapy. Each line gave me strength, and each word gave me peace. Weeks passed. My friends noticed the difference. "You speak so confidently now," one said. I smiled, because they didn't know I still felt fear sometimes. But now, I knew how to walk with it. I realized courage doesn't erase fear, it teaches you how to dance with it. One evening, I got a message from the English Club group chat. "We're looking for someone to give a short motivational talk next week. Any volunteers?" Without thinking, I typed, "I'll do it." And then, panic hit. What did I just agree to? For the next few days, I practiced. I wrote my short speech, rehearsed in front of the mirror, and even recorded it to time myself. But something felt off, it sounded too scripted, too robotic. So the night before, I tore the paper apart and whispered to my reflection. Speak from your heart. Not from your notes. When the day came, I stood in front of 20 people, some beginners, some fluent speakers. I looked at their faces, nervous and hopeful, and realized they were me, just a few months ago. So I told them my story. I told them how I used to be terrified to speak. How I'd hide behind silence. How I'd practice alone, not to impress others, but to rescue myself from fear. I said, "You don't need perfect English to inspire people. You just need a brave heart and a few honest words." The room went silent, the kind of silence that feels sacred. Then, one by one, they started clapping. I'll never forget that moment. It wasn't about English anymore. It was about courage finding its voice through me. That night, walking home, I looked up at the stars and whispered a quiet thank you. To my fear, for showing me where to grow. To my courage, for walking beside me. And to the language that taught me not just how to speak, but how to live. I knew the journey wasn't over. There were still mistakes to make, accents to refine, new words to learn. But for the first time ever, I wasn't afraid of that. Because now, I wasn't chasing fluency, I was living it, one courageous word at a time. Courage is a strange thing. It doesn't shout, it whispers. And once you start listening to that whisper, it begins to echo in every corner of your life. After that speech at the English Club, something inside me shifted forever. It was as if I had opened a hidden door in my own heart, a door that didn't just lead to fluency, but to freedom. I started noticing how English wasn't just a language I was learning, it was becoming the mirror of my growth. The way I spoke changed, slower, more thoughtful, filled with intention. The way I listened changed to deeper, more patient, as if every word someone said had a story behind it. One evening at work, my boss called me in. He said, "We're starting a new international branch. We'll need someone to handle communication with overseas clients. You've improved a lot, would you like to try?" For a second, my mind froze. The old me, the one who feared every English sentence, screamed, "You're not ready." But the new me smiled and said, "Yes. I'd love to." That one yes would change my life. The first few weeks were tough. Emails in English. Meetings with native speakers. Deadlines that left no room for hesitation. Every time I made a mistake, I felt a sting of embarrassment. But instead of running from it, I learned to stay. To breathe. To say, "I'll do better next time." One night, after a long meeting, I sat at my desk rereading an email draft I'd written. I realized something powerful, my sentences weren't perfect, but they carried my voice. Every word I typed came from a place of honesty, not fear. And that was enough. Because fluency, I realized again, isn't flawless English, it's fearless expression. Outside of work, my confidence began to spill into other parts of life. I started volunteering to help beginners at the English club. At first, I felt strange, me, a teacher? I still made mistakes. But then I saw myself through their eyes. They didn't see a perfect speaker. They saw someone who understood their fear. I remember one young man named Amir. He could write well, but he never spoke. Whenever I asked him to try, he'd shake his head. One day, after a session, I said to him, "Amir, do you know what's worse than making a mistake?" He looked up. "What?" "Staying silent forever." That night, he sent a voice note to the group chat. His voice trembled, but he did it. The entire group flooded the chat with claps and hearts. And I smiled. Because that was me, months ago. The more I helped others, the more I learned myself. I started studying not just English, but the psychology of language learning. Why do we fear speaking? Why does embarrassment hurt so much? Why do we equate accent with intelligence? I found my answers in experience. We fear because we think others are watching. We feel embarrassed because we tie our worth to our mistakes. And we compare accents because we forget that the goal of language is connection, not perfection. Once I understood that, my entire learning journey became lighter. I started enjoying the process, watching English movies without subtitles, reading self-help books, journaling every night. Each activity felt like polishing a part of my soul. And then came a moment I'll never forget. It was a conference call with clients from London. For weeks, I'd been preparing. I knew the project inside out. But when the meeting started, I froze again, not because I didn't know the content, but because one of the clients had a thick British accent I wasn't used to. For the first few minutes, I struggled to follow. I panicked. I thought, this is it. You're going to mess up. Then I remembered what I told Amir, what's worse than a mistake? Staying silent. So I interrupted, politely. I'm sorry, could you please repeat that last point? I just want to make sure I understand correctly. The client smiled. Of course. He repeated, slower this time. And the rest of the meeting went perfectly. Afterward, my boss messaged me. That was brave. Most people pretend to understand. You asked with confidence. That message hit me deeply. Confidence wasn't pretending to know everything, it was having the courage to learn openly. After that day, something magical happened. People at work started coming to me for help with their own English. Me, the guy who once hid behind silence, was now guiding others through it. It felt surreal. But it also taught me something beautiful. When you grow, you don't just rise for yourself, you lift others with you. And in helping them, I grew even faster. I started creating small English learning challenges for my colleagues. Word of the day, speak for 60 seconds, positive phrases only. At first, everyone laughed. But then, people started joining. Even my boss participated once. Soon, English wasn't just a skill at the office, it became part of our team culture. Laughter filled our meetings. Fear disappeared. Mistakes turned into lessons. One evening, while walking home, I thought about how far I had come. The boy who once avoided eye contact now led discussions with confidence. The person who once whispered now spoke with calm strength. And all of it, every bit of transformation, started not with confidence, but with courage. That realization hit me like lightning. Fear doesn't end when you become fluent. Fear ends when you decide to speak anyway. The next day, I wrote those lines on a sticky note and placed it above my mirror, the same mirror where I had once whispered my first hello. That mirror had seen my weakest moments. Now it reflected my strongest. But courage, I realized, isn't a destination. It's a habit. And like every habit, it must be practiced. There were still days I doubted myself. Days when I stumbled over words. Days when I compared my accent to others and felt small again. But every time that happened, I reminded myself, you've already walked through fire. Don't stop because of the smoke. So I kept going. I joined online English discussion groups. I made friends from different countries. We shared stories, dreams, failures, all in a language that had once terrified me. And in those conversations, I found something far greater than fluency. I found connection. People from across the world, strangers, became my teachers, my listeners, my companions. And every time I spoke, I could feel a deeper truth rising inside me. Learning English wasn't about impressing others. It was about discovering who I could become. That night, I opened my journal and wrote one final reflection for the day. Courage taught me to speak. English taught me to dream. Together, they taught me to live. I closed my journal, smiled, and turned off the light. My journey from fear to fluency was far from over, but I had learned something powerful. Fluency isn't the end of the road. It's the reward for every step you take while trembling, every word you say while doubting, every silence you break while afraid. Because courage is a language of its own. Growth never stops quietly. When courage takes root in your soul, it begins to bloom where fear once lived. Months passed, and life kept testing me, new challenges, higher expectations, bigger rooms to speak in. But this time, I didn't avoid the stage. I walked toward it. And that's when something unexpected began. One evening, after finishing work, I received a message from an old classmate. He said, "I saw your English video online. Man, your story really helped me. I didn't know you went through the same struggles." Video? He was talking about a short clip someone from the English club had recorded during one of our sessions, me sharing how fear had once silenced me. It wasn't perfect, my grammar slipped in a few places, my accent wavered. But my message was raw, real, human. That video went viral. Not in the millions of views sense, but in the quiet, meaningful way that touches hearts. People from different countries commented, "I feel this. This is me. I want to speak too." And that was the moment I realized something extraordinary. My story wasn't just mine anymore. It belonged to everyone who had ever been afraid to speak. I decided to start sharing more, not lessons, but stories. Stories about overcoming doubt. Stories about speaking even when your voice shakes. Stories that made people feel before they learned. I called it the Courage Series. Every week, I would record a short video in English, not as a teacher, but as a learner still on the journey. Sometimes, I spoke about mistakes that embarrassed me. Sometimes, I read letters from followers who shared their own struggles. And sometimes, I simply spoke from my heart. Those videos started spreading, first in small English learning groups, then across social media platforms. And slowly, a community was born. People from Brazil, Japan, Pakistan, Egypt, and dozens of other places began writing to me. They said, "Your story gave me courage to speak in my class. I used your words before my first interview. I stopped being ashamed of my accent." It was overwhelming in the most beautiful way. But along with the love came a quiet fear again. The fear of becoming someone I wasn't. The fear of pressure. The fear of losing the humility that started it all. So I reminded myself daily. Stay real. Stay a learner. Because the moment you think you've mastered everything, you stop growing. I decided that my mission wasn't to be perfect, it was to stay authentic. To keep reminding people that English is not a symbol of status. It's a tool for connection, understanding, and courage. One day, I was invited to speak at a global online conference for English learners. Thousands of people joined from across the world. When I saw the number of live viewers, my palms began to sweat. Old fears tried to return, that familiar whisper. What if you forget your words? What if they notice your accent? But this time, I smiled and whispered back. They don't need perfection. They need truth. And so I began. Years ago, I couldn't even introduce myself in English without trembling. Today, I'm speaking to you not because I became perfect, but because I refused to stay silent. If there's one thing I've learned, it's this: courage is not about speaking without fear. It's about speaking while afraid. The chat box filled with hearts and comments. People were crying, clapping, smiling through their screens. That day, something in me broke open, a deeper sense of purpose. I realized that this wasn't just about learning English anymore. It was about helping people change how they saw themselves. After the event, I received hundreds of messages. One of them stayed with me. It was from a young woman in Vietnam. She wrote, "I was afraid to speak for years because my teacher once laughed at my pronunciation. But after watching your video, I recorded my first English vlog today. Thank you for helping me find my voice again." I read her message again and again until tears filled my eyes. Because that was me. Once upon a time, I had written similar words to someone else, hoping for courage. Now, I was the one giving it. That's the circle of transformation. What you heal in yourself becomes the medicine for others. Months later, my channel crossed its first 1,000,000 views. But what made me smile wasn't the number, it was the impact. Each comment, each story, each person who dared to speak after watching, they were living proof that courage spreads like light. I remember sitting by my window that night, looking at the city lights below, thinking, this isn't the end. This is the beginning of something bigger. And then a thought hit me. If a single story could inspire thousands, what if thousands of stories could inspire the world? That became my new mission, the Global Voice Project. A space where English learners from everywhere could share their journey not as students, but as storytellers. Where mistakes were celebrated, not corrected. Where courage mattered more than grammar. And as those stories started to pour in, something magical happened. People weren't just learning English anymore. They were healing. They were growing. They were believing again. One evening, while editing a new video, I came across my very first recording, the shaky one, where I could barely speak without stammering. I smiled. It was imperfect. But it was beautiful. Because that video wasn't about flawless English. It was about the birth of courage. I decided to upload it again, this time titled, "The Day I Stopped Being Afraid." In the description, I wrote, "If you're afraid to speak, remember, this is how I started. Your fear isn't your enemy. It's your beginning." That video became the most shared clip on my channel. Not because it was new, but because it was true. Today, when people ask me, "How did you become fluent?" I tell them, I didn't. I just became brave enough to keep trying. Because fluency isn't about never making mistakes, it's about never letting mistakes make you. And when they ask, "What's your secret to learning English fast?" I smile and say, slow down. Feel every word. Live every sentence. Speak from your heart, not your dictionary. Now, every time I record a new story, I start with the same line. Welcome. This is not just a video. This is a turning point. Because somewhere out there, someone is watching, trembling, afraid, ready to give up, and maybe, just maybe, my voice will remind them that they're not alone. And if I've learned one truth through all of this, it's this. You don't need to be perfect to inspire others. You just need to be real enough to remind them they can rise too. The world is full of silent hearts waiting for one story, one word, one spark, to speak again. And if my journey has taught me anything, it's that courage is contagious. And so I'll keep speaking. I'll keep sharing. Because somewhere, someone still believes their accent makes them small, and I'm here to tell them, their voice is already powerful. Because courage was never about being fearless. It was about speaking anyway. And that is the true fluency of the soul. The morning light poured through the airplane window, painting the clouds in gold. Below me, a whole world stretched wide, cities, mountains, oceans, each one filled with stories, voices, dreams. I smiled to myself. This was it. The journey that began with fear had brought me here, not to a destination, but to a purpose. I was flying to my first ever International English Learners event, the Global Voice Gathering. Hundreds of people from around the world, all connected by one simple thing: courage. And I, once the person afraid to say hello, was now going to speak on stage before them. As the plane landed, my heart raced with the same nervous rhythm it once had in that classroom years ago. But this time, I didn't see fear as the enemy. It was my oldest friend, the one that had walked with me, tested me, and taught me who I really was. I took a deep breath and whispered, "Let's do this, one more time." When I reached the conference hall, the energy was electric. Flags from every nation lined the walls. Faces from every corner of the earth, young, old, shy, bold, filled the seats. And when I stepped on that stage, I felt something powerful: silence. Not empty silence, but the kind filled with anticipation, emotion, and unity. For a moment, I just stood there, looking at all those faces. People who had once been afraid, just like me. People who had written to me about trembling hands, broken grammar, forgotten words. And now, they were here. I smiled and began. Years ago, I couldn't even introduce myself in English. My voice used to break. My mind used to freeze. But today, I'm standing here because of one truth. Fear doesn't disappear. It transforms when you face it. The audience listened in absolute silence. Some smiled. Some cried. Some whispered, "That's me." You see, fluency isn't just about English. It's about being brave enough to express who you really are. It's about connecting hearts, not just words. It's about believing that your story matters in any language. Then I paused, looked at the crowd, and said something I hadn't planned. Raise your hand if you've ever been afraid to speak. Almost every hand went up. And I felt tears sting my eyes. Now look around, I said softly. You're not alone. You never were. The hall erupted into applause, not the loud kind that fills the air, but the emotional kind that fills the soul. After the speech, people began coming forward, one by one, country by country, to share their stories. A young boy from Kenya who learned English through old newspapers. A mother from Brazil who practiced speaking while cooking dinner. A taxi driver from India who listened to English podcasts during night shifts. Each story was a reminder: courage has no accent. Then, near the end of the line, a small girl walked up to me. She couldn't have been more than 10. Her voice was quiet, trembling. "Sir," she said, "I used to be scared to speak English, but I saw your video. And now I talk to my teacher every day. I want to speak like you one day." I knelt down, looked into her eyes, and said, "Don't speak like me. Speak like you. Because your voice is exactly what the world needs." She smiled a shy, beautiful smile and whispered, "Thank you for teaching me courage." And just like that, I realized something profound. All this time, I thought I was teaching English. But really, English had been teaching me. It had taught me patience when words came slowly. It had taught me humility when mistakes embarrassed me. It had taught me connection when people understood me beyond my accent. And most of all, it had taught me love for learning, love for people, love for life. English had become my mirror. Through it, I didn't just learn a language. I learned myself. That evening, as the sun set over the city skyline, I walked outside the hall. The sky was painted in orange and pink, like the ending of a perfect story. But I knew this wasn't an ending. It was another beginning. Because for every person who found their voice, 100 others were still searching. And I wanted to reach them all. I opened my camera, pressed record, and spoke directly into the lens. Hey, my friend. Maybe you're still afraid to speak. Maybe you think your accent is wrong, your grammar too broken, your words not enough. But listen, your fear doesn't make you weak. It makes you human. Every word you speak, no matter how imperfect, is proof that you're trying. And that's what courage looks like. I smiled and added, so don't wait for perfect English. Start with your real voice. Because the world doesn't need more perfect speakers, it needs more authentic hearts. Then I looked into the lens one last time and said, and if you ever forget how powerful your words can be, come back here. We'll walk this journey together. Months later, that video would become the most watched story on my channel. Millions of people from every part of the world learning, crying, smiling together. But I didn't need the numbers anymore. I had already won the moment I learned to speak without fear. That night, before sleeping, I opened my old mirror, the same one I used to practice in years ago. It still had small cracks on the edges. I looked into it and whispered, "Thank you for not giving up on me." And in that reflection, I didn't just see myself. I saw everyone who had ever dared to speak, to learn, to grow. Because this wasn't just my story. It was our story. A story of millions of voices rising from silence. A story of courage that crossed languages, countries, and hearts. The world doesn't forget voices that come from truth. They echo quietly, endlessly, in the hearts of those who once felt unseen. Months after the global voice gathering, life began to move faster than ever. Interviews, collaborations, invitations, my inbox overflowed. But deep down, I knew this wasn't about fame. It was about responsibility. Because every message that said, "You changed my life," carried another unspoken question. Now what do I do with my courage? One night, I sat in my small studio, the same space where everything began. The lights were dim, the mic flickered softly, and the mirror from my old room stood in the corner, still cracked, still honest. And I thought, maybe it's time to stop being the only storyteller. Maybe it's time to make the world the storyteller. So, I began building something new, not a channel, not a course, but a movement. It was called Speak to Rise. A simple idea. Every learner, no matter where they're from, could share one story in English about how courage changed their life. No grammar tests. No competition. Just truth. Within weeks, stories began to flood in. A refugee in Greece who learned English by reading street signs. A nurse in the Philippines who practiced while comforting patients. A teenager from Turkey who made his first English podcast in his bedroom. Each story carried the same rhythm: fear, failure, courage, and breakthrough. It was as if the world was finally speaking in one language, the language of resilience. But there was one story that broke me. It came from a man in his 50s named Omar, from a small village in Sudan. He wrote, "All my life I thought English was only for young people, smart people, rich people. But last year, my son showed me your video. We watched it together, and he said, 'Baba, you can learn too.' Every night we practice one sentence before sleeping. Last week, I spoke to my first tourist. I said, 'Welcome, my friend.' He smiled. I felt like I had just opened a new world. When I finished reading, I just sat there, silent, emotional. Because this was why it all mattered. It wasn't about how many people watched the videos. It was about how many hearts believed again. Weeks later, we decided to organize a virtual celebration, a global event called the Echo Night. We didn't invite famous people or influencers. We invited ordinary heroes, those who had once been silent, and now spoke with courage. Thousands joined from screens across the world, their faces glowing in small digital windows, yet their spirits filling the universe. And when the event began, something magical happened. There was no central stage. Everyone was the stage. One by one, people began to speak. I was afraid to introduce myself. I used to hide in class. Now I read books aloud to my children. Now I speak to strangers with pride. Their voices blended into something indescribable, a chorus of courage, a song of humanity. I didn't speak much that night. I didn't need to. The movement had found its own heartbeat. And for the first time, I realized I wasn't the voice of this story anymore. They were. After the event ended, I stepped outside into the quiet night. The air was cool. The city lights shimmered like stars that had fallen closer to Earth. I closed my eyes and listened, not to music, not to noise, but to the echo of every voice I had ever heard. It sounded like hope. I remembered my first trembling hello. The first time I dared to speak to a stranger. The first time I stood on a stage. And now, those tiny echoes had turned into a symphony. A thought crossed my mind. If fear is contagious, then courage can be too. And maybe, just maybe, the world doesn't need more languages. It needs more listeners. More people willing to hear, to understand, to connect. Because that's what English truly gave me. Not just words, but windows into lives, hearts, and stories I never would have known. As I walked back home, a soft rain began to fall, gentle, cleansing, almost poetic. And I whispered, "We did it. We turned fear into freedom." The rain tapped against the window like applause from the sky. And for the first time, I didn't feel like a teacher or a speaker. I felt like a bridge between silence and speech, between fear and faith, between hearts and hope. That night, before sleeping, I opened my journal, the same one where I had written my first English sentence. It read, in messy handwriting, "One day, I'll speak without fear." I smiled and wrote beneath it, "And today, I help others do the same." If you're still watching, listening, or reading, know this. You don't need to have perfect words to change your life. You just need to begin. Speak. Even if your voice shakes. Write. Even if your grammar breaks. Because courage doesn't live in perfect sentences. It lives in imperfect hearts that refuse to stay silent. So if you haven't already, subscribe, stay inspired, and keep learning through stories that remind you who you truly are. Because this channel isn't just about English. It's about becoming fluent in courage. And courage never ends.